The sand tasted like copper and ash. Marcus Webb hit the ground hard, shoulder first, the impact driving air from his lungs in a grunt that would have embarrassed him 30 years ago. Six Korvathi warriors circled him in the Nevada darkness, their crystalline armor catching moonlight like shattered mirrors. The gauntlet on his right arm pulsed with blue-white energy, foreign and familiar, all at once responding to instincts he didn't know he possessed. One warrior lunged. Marcus raised his arm without thinking, and a lance of pure light erupted from his palm, punching through the alien's chest plate. The Korvathi crumpled. Five left. Behind him, a woman's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding, despite the tremor underneath. Marcus, behind you, he spun. The blade meant for his spine instead carved a line across his ribs, shallow but burning. Marcus grabbed the warrior's wrist, felt the gauntlet flare hot, watched crystalline armor crack and shatter under his grip. Four left. The remaining Korvathi hesitated. Long enough. Marcus swept low the gauntlet, leaving a trail of energy that caught two warriors at the knees. They went down. The last two broke and ran into the desert night, their armor winking out of sight like dying stars. Silence except for his ragged breathing and the faint hum of alien technology fused to his flesh. Marcus turned to face the woman who'd saved his life. Queen Lyrane Solarius stood 20 feet away, her own armor fractured and incomplete, exposing pale skin marked with glowing purple lines that pulsed in rhythm with his gauntlet. Her blood, luminescent and wrong, dripped from a cut above her eye. She met his gaze. No fear, no gratitude, just exhaustion and something else he couldn't name. Her lips moved. How did we get here? The question hung between them like smoke. Marcus Webb lowered his arm, felt the gauntlet's heat fade to a tolerable warmth, and allowed himself one bitter laugh. 48 hours ago, he'd been nobody. Just an old man fixing air conditioners in jets he'd never fly again. 48 hours ago, he hadn't known aliens were real, that his son had died for them, or that his own blood carried secrets older than his grief. 48 hours ago, he'd been Marcus Webb, 68 years old, invisible, irrelevant, waiting to die with some dignity intact. Now he was something else entirely. The memory hit him like vertigo, pulling him back. 48 hours earlier, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, 0600 hours. The F-35's cockpit smelled like hydraulic fluid and the kind of overconfidence only 25-year-old pilots could manufacture. Marcus knelt beside the landing gear, wrench in hand, while Lieutenant Brenner stood 3 feet above him, talking to his phone instead of the mechanic, keeping his aircraft functional, keeping him alive if the kid cared to think about it. Brenner's voice carried the particular smugness of someone who'd never watched a friend bleed out over the Gulf. Yeah, they got this old-timer doing pre-flight, probably fought in World War II or some shit. The other pilot laughed through the speaker. Marcus tightened the hydraulic coupling without comment. 33 years of service, 2 wars, and a medical discharge that still burned in his chest when the weather turned cold. None of it visible to kids like Brenner, who saw only the wrinkles and the gray hair and the maintenance coveralls that marked him as support personnel. Disposable. David would have said something. David had always been better at standing up to authority, at making people see what they'd rather ignore. But David was 13 years dead blown apart at Meridian Station while saving people who looked like monsters to everyone but him. Marcus finished. The coupling stood with the careful slowness of a man whose knees remembered every hard landing from his own flying days and moved to the next jet without acknowledging Brenner's existence. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Some you'd already lost. The alarm changed everything. It started as a distant wail, then closer, then everywhere at once. Red lights strobed across the hangar. Personnel scrambled. Marcus straightened instinct, overriding the maintenance routine that had defined his last decade. The PA system crackled. Unknown object down Sector 740 miles north. Rescue and recovery teams to briefing room Alpha. This is not a drill. Marcus was moving before his brain caught up, coveralls still smeared with grease, heading for the briefing room out of muscle memory older than his grief. He'd been search and rescue before he'd been a pilot, combat medic before that back in '91 when the Gulf burned and young men learned how fragile their bodies really were. The briefing room filled fast, pilots mostly, officers, people who mattered. Marcus slipped in along the back wall, unnoticed, listening. Major Chen stood at the front, her face illuminated by the tactical display. At 0547 hours, NORAD tracked an object entering atmosphere at velocities inconsistent with any known aircraft or meteor. It impacted 42 miles north-northwest of this base. Initial drone reconnaissance shows extensive debris field, possible survivors, and confirmed hostiles in the area. The display shifted. Wreckage. Twisted metal that looked almost organic, gleaming even in the pre-dawn darkness. And bodies. Too many bodies, their armor reflecting starlight. Someone whispered Korvathi. The word hit Marcus like a fist to the solar plexus. His vision tunneled. 13 years collapsed into nothing, and he was back at Meridian Station holding David's dog tags because that was all they'd found intact, listening to the official report that stripped all meaning from his son's death. Captain David Webb gave his life neutralizing a Korvathi munitions depot. Posthumous Silver Star. Full honors. The kind of words that meant everything and nothing. Nobody mentioned the 47 Korvathi civilians David had pulled from that depot before it exploded. Evacuees, non-combatants, children, some of them, if aliens had children the way humans understood the concept. David had known, had gone back for them anyway. Marcus forced his breathing steady, focused on Chen's briefing. Rescue teams will deploy in 15 minutes. We need combat medics, engineers, anyone with field experience. Volunteers only. This is a hot zone, people. The Marauders have been tracking Korvathi activity for months. If there are survivors, we're in a race. Marcus pushed forward through the crowd, past the pilots and officers who parted without seeing him. Major, I'm in. Chen looked up, her eyes scanning his coveralls, his age, the maintenance badge clipped to his chest. Her expression said everything: too old, too broken, too irrelevant. Her voice confirmed it. Webb, we need active personnel for this operation. I appreciate the offer, but I was a combat medic, ma'am, 23rd Infantry, 1st Gulf War, search and rescue certified, 3 years in field hospitals before I transferred to aviation. Marcus kept his voice level, professional, hiding the desperation underneath. You said volunteers. I'm volunteering. Chen's jaw tightened. She glanced at the officers around her, then back at Marcus. Webb, you're 68 years old. When's the last time you ran a mile? Yesterday, ma'am, same as every day. Not entirely true. His knees hurt like hell afterward, but she didn't need to know that. Chen shook her head. Denied. We have younger, faster personnel who haven't seen combat, ma'am, who'll freeze the first time they see something that shouldn't exist. Marcus held her gaze. I won't. For a moment, he thought she might relent, then she turned away. My decision stands. You're dismissed, Webb. Marcus stood there another 3 seconds, invisible again, before turning and walking out. The hallway stretched empty and fluorescent. He made it to the equipment locker before the anger hit the useless rage of a man who'd spent 30 years proving his worth only to be discarded when it mattered. His hands shook as he punched the locker code, pulled out his personal kit, the medical bag he kept stocked out of habit, and the stubborn belief that someday, somehow he'd be useful again. David's photograph stared at him from inside the locker door. 26 years old, in the picture marine dress blues, that crooked smile that had charmed half the nurses at Camp Lejeune. Marcus had taken the photo 3 weeks before Meridian. 3 weeks before the universe rearranged itself around an absence that never stopped aching. The thought crystallized with the cold clarity of a man who'd already lost everything that mattered. They can't stop me if I'm already gone. Marcus grabbed the medical kit, added a canteen and emergency rations, and headed for the motor pool. The Jeep started on the second try, coughing like his lungs did on cold mornings. He drove past the gate at 06:15 p.m., timing it during shift change, when nobody paid attention to maintenance vehicles leaving base. 42 miles north-northwest, easy enough to calculate, easier to follow with the smoke pillar, visible even in the growing dawn. The desert opened around him, vast and indifferent. Marcus had always liked the desert, its honesty. It killed you, or it didn't, with no pretense about fairness or meaning. Not like politics, not like war, not like watching your son become a flag-draped coffin while politicians talked about necessary sacrifice. The smoke grew thicker. He drove. 20 miles out, the debris field began. Small pieces at first, fragments that looked like shattered glass but caught the light wrong with colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Marcus slowed, navigating around larger chunks of wreckage. Some of it still smoldered. Some of it pulsed with faint internal light, as if the metal itself refused to admit it was dead. 30 miles out, he found the first body. Marauder from the crude cybernetics fused into what had been human flesh. Half the skull replaced with crude metal, one arm ending in a weapon mount, still crackling with the residual charge. Dead maybe 3 hours, killed by something that had punched through his chest armor like paper. Marcus checked for vitals anyway. Training, habit. The small rituals that separated medics from everyone else who learned to ignore bodies. Nothing. He moved on. The crash site sprawled across 2 miles of desert gouged into sand and rock with the violence of controlled catastrophe. The ship, if it was a ship, had broken into 3 major sections, each the size of a house connected by trails of smaller wreckage. Cravathi design, Marcus recognized from the briefings he'd been forced to sit through after Meridian. Crystalline hull structure, organic-looking curves, technology that blurred the line between machine and living thing. Beautiful in the way disasters often were. Marcus parked the Jeep behind a rock outcropping, grabbed his medical kit, and approached on foot. More bodies, marauders mostly torn apart with surgical precision. Whatever had come down fighting it had known how to kill. Marcus counted 12 corpses before he heard it. Breathing. Ragged, wet, the desperate sound of lungs trying to work around damage they couldn't compensate for. He followed the sound to the largest section of wreckage half buried in sand that had fused to glass from the heat. The hull had cracked open, exposing an interior that glowed with dying light. And there, wedged between the slabs of crystalline armor that looked like they'd grown rather than been built, was her. Marcus knew instantly she was important. The armor alone told him that, too, ornate, too perfectly crafted, marked with symbols he couldn't read, but recognized as rank. Her face, what he could see of it through the cracked helmet, carried the angular beauty of Cravathi features. High cheekbones, eyes too large and too violet to be human skin, that seemed to generate its own faint luminescence. And she was dying. The armor had locked around her every joint, frozen the chest plate, constricting with each breath, like a vice slowly closing. Her eyes found his widen with something between hope and terror. Her lips moved. He couldn't hear through the helmet. Marcus moved closer, careful hands visible. His medic training ward with 13 years of grief and rage. This was a Cravathi. The people who'd killed his son. The enemy of such simple categories still meant anything. She tried again, her voice barely audible through the cracked helmet speaker. "Human, help, please." The words came out in English, accented but clear. Practiced. She'd prepared for this, Marcus realized. Prepared to beg for her life in a language that wasn't hers. He knelt beside her, setting down his kit, examining the armor with a medic's eye. The damage was obvious, even without understanding the technology. Power failure had triggered some kind of lockdown protocol, sealing her inside a tomb of her own protection. The chest plate showed stress fractures, edges cutting into her with each shallow breath. Minutes, maybe less, before her ribs cracked, or the armor simply crushed her lungs. The helmet display flickered life support 3%. Veil lockdown active. Death in 4 minutes. 4 minutes to decide what kind of man he still was. Her eyes tracked his movement, desperate now, and she forced out more words. "I am Lyraean Solarius. Please. I beg. Mercy." The name meant nothing to him. Just another alien dying alone in the desert, asking a human for compassion her people had never shown his son. Then she said the words that changed everything. "I know, Meridian. I know. David Webb." Marcus froze, his hands steady a moment before it began to shake. She saw it, recognized the name's impact. "Your son. He saved 47. My people. I came to honor his sacrifice." The words hit like bullets, each one finding a wound that had never healed. Marcus stared at her, this dying alien queen who knew his son's name, and felt the careful walls he'd built around his grief crack open. His voice came out rough. "You knew David." She managed a fractional nod, the movement restricted by her frozen armor. "Hero, to us, changed. Our war policy came to Earth to seek peace for him." 4 minutes, 3.5 now. Marcus looked at his hands, at the medical kit beside him, at this woman who'd traveled across space to honor a dead man's memory. He thought about what David would do. What David had done, running back into an exploding building to save people everyone else called monsters. The decision crystallized. Marcus opened his kit, pulled out a pry bar, and started looking for release points in the armor. The crystalline plates didn't work like human technology, no obvious latches or seams. They seemed to flow into each other, locked by light rather than mechanics. 3 minutes. His fingers found symbols etched into the chest plate runes that pulsed with faint internal light. He pressed them in sequence, guessing hoping instinct would guide him where knowledge failed. The armor didn't respond. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Lyran's breathing grew more labored, each inhale a visible struggle. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, trusting him, despite every reason not to. Marcus pressed harder, tracing the runes with growing desperation. His palm came away bloody. The symbols were sharp, cutting into his skin. Blood dripped onto the crystalline surface. The armor erupted with golden light. A voice, artificial and ancient, spoke from everywhere and nowhere. Bloodline recognized, Genesis protocol detected, Sentinel candidate confirmed. The chest plate shuddered, cracked, then fell away in sections. Pressurized air hissed out in a cloud of steam that smelled like ozone and something floral Marcus couldn't name. Lyran gasped, her whole body convulsing, as her lungs finally expanded, fully dragging in desperate gulps of Nevada air. Marcus caught her as she slumped forward, her weight slight, despite the partial armor still attached. Up close, he could see the details. The distance had hidden skin, marked with intricate lines that glowed faint purple, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Delicate features twisted in pain and relief, eyes that held intelligence and exhaustion in equal measure. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You touched the veil. We are bound now." Marcus didn't understand. He lowered her gently to the sand, hands already moving through triage checks he'd performed 1,000 times. Pulse rapid but steady, breathing stabilizing. No obvious bleeding beyond superficial cuts. The armor had protected her from the worst of the impact, even as it tried to kill her. She caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "By ancient law, you are my sentinel now." "I don't know what that means." Marcus gently pried her hand away, focused on the medical work. "I'm just trying to keep you alive." "You don't understand." Her eyes closed, exhaustion pulling her under, despite her efforts to stay conscious. "The veil chose you. It never mistakes." Then she was out, her body going limp in his arms. Marcus checked her pulse again, satisfied she'd passed into natural sleep rather than shock. He started to pull his hand back, and that's when he noticed the armor fragment still clutched in his other palm. The piece he'd pried loose, no bigger than a playing card, glowing with the same golden light that had announced whatever the hell Genesis protocol meant. As he watched, the fragment began to move. Not falling, not sliding. Moving with purpose, flowing like liquid metal up his arm, spreading across his skin in patterns that mirrored the marks on Lorraine's body. Marcus tried to shake it off, scrape it away, but the crystalline substance ignored his efforts, continuing its steady migration until it covered his entire right arm from fingertips to elbow. Then it solidified, became a gauntlet, seamless and perfect, fitted to his arm as if it had been made for him specifically. The weight felt right, natural, like his arm had been incomplete his whole life, and only now discovered its proper shape. Marcus raised his hand, watched light play across the crystalline surface, felt power thrumming just beneath his skin. Alien technology fused to his flesh, and he couldn't even feel where one ended and the other began. Behind him, engines. Marcus spun, dropping into a crouch, positioning himself between Lorraine and the sound. 8 vehicles crested the ridge, modified trucks bristling with weapons, bearing the crude markings of marauder raiders. Men who made their living scavenging alien technology and enslaving anyone unlucky enough to survive a crash. They'd come for Lorraine, for whatever they could strip from her ship. For him, probably, once they realized what his arm had become. The lead truck stopped 50 yards out. A man stood in the bed, cybernetics covering half his face, a rifle aimed casually in Marcus's direction. His voice carried across the desert, amplified by speakers built into his jaw. "Step away from the alien, old man. Walk away and we'll let you live." Marcus didn't move. The marauder laughed, "Your funeral, hero." 8 trucks, maybe 30 raiders, all armed, all experienced at killing. Marcus had a medical kit and an alien gauntlet he didn't know how to use. The math wasn't complicated. He looked down at Lorraine, still unconscious, defenseless. Thought about David, about the choice his son had made, knowing it would cost him everything. Thought about the 47 people who'd lived because One man decided their lives mattered more than his own. Marcus stood placing himself between the raiders and the woman who traveled across stars to honor his son's memory. The gauntlet began to glow. He raised his right arm, felt energy gathering beneath the crystalline surface, responding to emotions he didn't know he could still feel. Not fear, not courage exactly. Something simpler, the absolute certainty that he wouldn't move, wouldn't yield, wouldn't watch another person die when he could do something about it. The marauder's smile faded. Last chance, old man. Marcus Webb, 68 years old, medically discharged, invisible and irrelevant, and supposedly too broken to matter, looked at 30 armed raiders and said the words that would define everything that followed. Come take her. The gauntlet erupted with light, and the desert erupted with screams. The first raider died before Marcus understood what he'd done. The gauntlet translated intention into annihilation, a spear of crystalline light that punched through the truck's engine block, through the man standing behind it, through the sand beyond, in a line that glowed molten for 3 seconds before fading to glass. The silence afterward felt heavier than the explosion. Marcus stared at his arm, at the weapon he'd become, and felt nothing. No horror, no exhilaration, just the cold acceptance of a man who'd already decided his life was worth less than the one behind him. The remaining raiders recovered fast. Professional killers. Marcus recognized not just scavengers playing soldier. They scattered into defensive positions, weapons tracking, using the vehicles as cover. Smart, disciplined, exactly the kind of opponents who'd kill him efficiently once they adapted to the threat. He had maybe 10 seconds before they coordinated. The gauntlet hummed with restrained energy, and Marcus felt something that might have been instruction, not words. Deeper than that, knowledge written directly into his nervous system, showing him possibilities his mind couldn't articulate, but his body understood perfectly. He moved, not running, flowing. His 68-year-old knees that complained about stairs suddenly carried him across 30 yards of desert in heartbeats that felt stretched and strange. The gauntlet led and Marcus followed, letting the weapon use him as much as he used it. A raider emerged from behind a truck, rifle rising. Marcus swept his arm in an arc, and crystalline shards erupted from the gauntlet like shrapnel. The raider went down without firing. 2 more came from the left flanking. Marcus pivoted movement that should have wrenched his back and drove the gauntlet into the sand. Energy rippled outward in a shockwave that knocked both raiders off their feet, their weapons skittering away across the hardpan. Somewhere in the rational part of his brain that wasn't drowning in adrenaline and alien technology, Marcus registered that he should be dead. Should have been dead 30 seconds ago. Was fighting like a man half his age with training he'd never received, channeling power that belonged in mythology rather than the Nevada desert. The gauntlet burned hotter with each use, not painful but insistent, demanding more. Behind him a sound. Marcus' spun arm rising and froze. Larian stood swaying beside the wreckage, one hand braced against twisted metal, the other extended toward him. Her armor, what remained of it, glowed the same blue-white as his gauntlet, and around her, suspended in midair like hummingbirds, floated a dozen crystalline shards pulled from the scattered debris. Her eyes met his across the distance. No words. She didn't need them. The shards shot forward, guided by her will, each one finding a target with surgical precision. Raiders dropped their weapons, sparking as crystalline fragments sheared through circuitry and flesh with equal ease. Not killing shots, Marcus noted. Disabling. Professional and precise, despite her obvious exhaustion. The remaining raiders broke. 5 trucks peeled away into the desert, engines screaming, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Marcus watched them disappear into the heat shimmer, his arms still raised, the gauntlet's glow fading to a sullen pulse. Silence returned. Real silence this time, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the rasp of his own breathing. Marcus lowered his arm, felt every year of his age crash back into his body all at once. His knees shook. His back screamed. The gauntlet had burned through whatever reserves of adrenaline and borrowed strength had kept him moving, and now came the bill. He turned to check on Lorraine and found her collapsed against the wreckage, sliding slowly toward the sand. Marcus ran, stumbled, really covering the distance before she hit the ground. He caught her, felt how light she was despite the armor fragments still attached, and eased her down gently. Her eyes fluttered open. Violet and far too knowing, you fought. For me. You were unconscious. Someone had to. Marcus checked her pulse, found it rapid but steady. You shouldn't be awake. That kind of trauma, the bond. Her hand found his wrist, her touch cool against his overheated skin. I feel what you feel. Your determination woke me. Marcus pulled his arm back, uncomfortable with the intimacy implied. I don't know what bond you're talking about. I pulled you out of that armor because it was killing you. That's it. No. She tried to sit up, fairly settled for turning her head to meet his eyes. When you touched the veil, my armor, it recognized you, accepted you. That doesn't happen. Can't happen. The veil bonds only with its queen and her chosen sentinel. One bond for life. Then it made a mistake. I'm nobody's sentinel. I'm a 68-year-old mechanic who should be dead right now. Marcus grabbed his medical kit, started checking her for injuries that needed immediate attention. Training, routine, anything to avoid thinking about what she was saying. Liren's fingers closed around his wrist again tighter. Look at your arm. Look at what it's become. Marcus looked. The gauntlet had settled into something almost organic, crystalline plates that moved with his tendons pulsing with faint internal light, synchronized to his heartbeat. Beautiful and terrifying and completely impossible. This doesn't make me your anything. It makes me contaminated. He tried to pull away, but her grip held firm despite her weakness. It makes you mine. No possessiveness in her voice, just exhausted certainty. By Kravathi law, you are bound to me until death separates us. My protector, my sentinel, my... She stopped, searched for the human word husband in your terms. Marcus jerked his hand back hard enough that she couldn't hold on. I didn't marry anyone. I pulled you out of a coffin. You touched the veil. You bled on it. The veil accepted your blood, recognized your... She struggled with the concept, your genetic mark. Genesis protocol, the voice said. What does that mean? Marcus didn't answer. Couldn't answer because he didn't know himself. Didn't want to know what Genesis protocol meant, what it implied about his blood and his past, and the careful lies he'd built his life around. David's face surfaced in his memory. That crooked smile, those eyes that had seen too much too young and still chose kindness over hate. Marcus forced words past the tightness in his throat. You said you knew my son. Lirayan's expression softened grief, replacing the urgency. David Webb, Captain United Earth Marines. He saved 47 of my people at Meridian Station. Civilians, evacuees. He could have left them, should have by any military calculation. But he went back. 3 times. The 4th time, she stopped, swallowed. The building collapsed. He died, giving them time to reach the transports. I know how he died. Marcus stood, needing distance, needing air that didn't taste like failure and regret. I was given a flag and a medal and a speech about necessary sacrifice. Nobody mentioned the 47 people. Nobody told me he died for aliens. He died because he was better than the war we made him fight. Lirayan's voice carried steel underneath the sympathy. Your son saw people where everyone else saw weapons, saw children where others saw future enemies. He changed our war policy, made us question why we were fighting. Marcus walked 10 paces, stared at the blood glass trail, where his first attack had landed at the bodies cooling in the morning sun. Did it matter your people still died? Mine still died. David still died. What did any of it accomplish? I'm here, simple words carrying weight he couldn't parse. I came to Earth to honor his sacrifice, to continue what he started. Peace, Marcus. That's why I'm here. Not conquest, not war. Peace, And how's that working out? Marcus gestured at the carnage, the wrecked ship, the desert that would soon be crawling with military personnel, asking questions he couldn't answer. You crashed. Raiders tried to kill you. I'm contaminated with alien technology I don't understand. This looks like peace to you. Before Lirayan could respond, the sound of engines returned. Different pitch this time, military grade, multiple vehicles approaching fast from the south. The base had finally mobilized, and they'd be here in minutes with questions and protocols and very specific ideas about how to handle alien survivors. Marcus looked at Lirayan, at the wreckage at his gauntleted arm that marked him as something other than human. They're coming. If they find you, they'll take me. Lirayan struggled to her feet, swaying, one hand braced against the hull. Imprison me. Study me. You as well, probably. That gauntlet makes you valuable, dangerous. They won't let either of us walk away. Marcus knew she was right. Major Chen's face surfaced in his memory, her dismissal still fresh. They'd seen him as disposable before. Now they'd see him as contaminated, a security risk, something to be locked away and dissected until they understood what he'd become. His eyes tracked across the desert, calculating distances and possibilities with the tactical awareness that had kept him alive through 2 wars. The raiders' abandoned truck sat 30 yards away, keys probably still in the ignition. Gas enough to reach the Arizona border, maybe farther if they rationed. After that, nothing. Fugitives in a world that wouldn't forgive what they'd become. Marcus made the decision without conscious thought. Can you walk? Laren pushed away from the hull, took 3 steps before her legs buckled. Marcus caught her, felt how her armor had become more burden than protection, dead weight, that her exhausted body couldn't carry. The armor needs to come off, all of it. He lowered her to sitting, started examining the remaining plates for release mechanisms. I'll leave your undersuit, but the heavy pieces are slowing you down. She nodded, too tired to argue, and guided his hands to the right pressure points. The armor came away in sections, each piece hitting the sand with solid weight. Underneath, Lirayan wore something that looked like black silk, but moved wrong, clinging to her form while somehow maintaining its own structure. The glowing lines Marcus had seen earlier, runes she called them, covered more of her body than he'd realized. Down her arms, across her collarbones, tracing her spine in patterns that seemed mathematical and organic at once. Beautiful, alien, undeniably other. Marcus forced his attention back to practical matters. Can you run? Can you carry me if I can't? She stood, testing her balance, and managed 3 steps before swaying. The bond, it should help. Try taking my hand. Marcus hesitated, then reached out. The moment his gauntleted hand touched hers, something shifted. Energy flowed between them, his strength bleeding into her exhaustion, her alien vitality answering his human limitations. Not comfortable, not pleasant, but functional. Liren's straightened, color returning to her face. Better. The veil shares resources between bonded pairs. Your strength, my regeneration. It will balance us. How long does it last? As long as we touch. She looked at their joined hands, something complicated crossing her expression. The bond deepens with contact. Eventually, we won't need to touch. We'll be connected. Always. The implications of that should have terrified him. Probably did, somewhere underneath the exhaustion and adrenaline crash. But the military vehicles were closer now, visible as dust plumes on the southern horizon, and Marcus had exactly 0 time for existential crises. He pulled Lirayan toward the nearest raider truck, found the keys hanging from the ignition, as predicted, and shoved her toward the passenger seat. Get in. Stay low. If anyone asks, you're my daughter and we're heading to Phoenix for medical treatment. I don't look human. She settled into the seat, her alien features catching the morning light in ways that would never pass casual inspection. Then don't let anyone see you. Marcus started the engine, felt it catch and roar, and pointed the truck north. Away from the base, away from the approaching military convoy, away from everything that might have passed for safety if he'd been willing to surrender. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, Marcus watching the mirrors for pursuit. Laren pressed low in her seat with her face turned toward the floorboards. Crystalline light rippled across the steering wheel, where his gauntlet rested, a constant reminder of how thoroughly his life had jumped the rails. The Arizona border came and went, marked by a sun-bleached sign nobody maintained anymore. Marcus took side roads, avoiding highways, in their inevitable checkpoints, navigating by the sun in the mountains to the east, in instincts that dated back to search and rescue operations in terrain just like this. Where are we going? Her words barely reached him above the engine noise. I don't know. Marcus took a turn that might have been a road once before the desert reclaimed it. Away until I figure out what happens next. They'll hunt us. I know. Both sides. Your people and mine. Marcus glanced at her, saw her staring at her hands, at the runes that marked her as something Earth had barely learned to fear. Why your people? Because I touched you, bonded with you. That's... She searched for the right English words, settled on something that sounded like ritual pollution. Forbidden. Queens don't bond with humans. Don't bond with anyone outside Cravathi bloodlines. By allowing the veil to accept you, I've broken laws older than your civilization. You didn't allow anything. You were dying. I saved your life. Irrelevant. Flat. Final. I asked you to touch the veil. I knew what it might mean. I chose to live, and the consequences are mine to bear. Marcus drove another mile before responding. So what are the consequences? At minimum, exile, loss of crown title authority. My brother Veyron will claim regency, declare me unfit, and petition the council for permanent removal. Lyran's hands clenched in her lap. At maximum, execution. Both of us. The bond must be severed, and death is the cleanest method. There's a cheerful thought. Marcus took another turn, this one toward a rock formation that might offer cover. The sun had climbed higher, and the truck's shadow had shrunk to nothing. They'd been driving 2 hours. His military colleagues would have expanded their search grid, by now coordinated with satellites and drones, started tracking heat signatures and abandoned vehicles. Time was running out faster than gas. He pulled the truck into the shadow of a sandstone overhang, killed the engine, and turned to face Liran properly for the first time since they'd fled. So we're both fugitives, both contaminated, both looking at death or imprisonment if either side catches us. Yes. And this bond, this sentinel thing, it's permanent. Until death. She met his eyes and he saw the exhaustion there, the weight of choices made under pressure that allowed no contemplation. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trap you, but I didn't want to die alone in the desert, and you were there, and the veil... She stopped, started again. The veil is never wrong. It chose you for a reason. Marcus looked at his gauntleted arm, at the crystalline plates that had become as much part of him as bone and muscle. I'm 68 years old. I fix air conditioners. I lost my son 13 years ago, and I've been waiting to die ever since. What reason could possibly make me anyone's sentinel? Liran reached across the truck's cabin, her hand hovering near his, not quite touching, may I? He didn't pull away. She placed her palm against his gauntlet, and the connection flared again, that uncomfortable intimacy of shared sensation, thoughts bleeding across boundaries that should have remained solid. And in that moment of contact, Marcus felt what Lorraine felt, bone-deep exhaustion. Yes, but underneath it, something fiercer. Determination, purpose, the absolute certainty of a woman who'd chosen to risk everything for a dead human's dream of peace. She felt what he felt too, he realized. The grief that never faded, the rage at being cast aside, the desperate need to matter before death claimed whatever scraps remained. Her voice emerged soft but steady. The veil chose you because you understand loss, because you've survived when you shouldn't, because despite everything you still pulled me from the armor instead of leaving me to die. Her fingers tightened on the gauntlet. It chose you because David Webb's father would never abandon someone who needed him, even when every logical reason said he should. Marcus pulled his hand back, breaking the connection. Don't use my son to manipulate me. I'm not. I'm telling you the truth. Loren settled back in her seat, her expression carefully neutral. The veil reads character, judges worth. It accepted you because you're exactly what a sentinel should be, whether you believe that or not. Before Marcus could respond, his stomach growled, loud, embarrassing. A reminder that they'd been running on adrenaline and alien technology, but his body still required mundane things like food and water. Liran's lips twitched towards something that might have been amusement. When did you last eat? Yesterday? Maybe. Marcus grabbed the emergency rations from his kit, split them with her. Protein bars that tasted like cardboard in disappointment. They ate in silence while the desert baked around them. The water went faster than Marcus liked. One canteen between them, and it emptied in 4 swallows each. The Arizona desert in June didn't forgive mistakes, and driving away from civilization without proper supplies qualified as a significant mistake. He checked the truck's GPS, disabled thankfully, or they'd already have company, and pulled out a paper map from the glove box. Old habit, always keep paper backups when technology could fail. The nearest town sat 40 miles northeast. Too far, too exposed. But there was something else, a notation on the map that made his tactical brain start calculating on possibilities. White Sands Proving Ground 60 miles north-northeast. Abandoned military facility decommissioned in 2090 when budget cuts shuttered half the experimental programs. Abandoned meant no people. No people meant no questions. And abandoned military facilities meant infrastructure, water shelter, possibly even power if any of the backup systems still functioned. Marcus folded the map, made the decision. I know a place, 60 miles. We'll be exposed for about an hour crossing open desert, but after that we'll have cover supplies, time to figure out next steps. You're not taking me back to your people. Not a question. No, they'd lock you up, probably dissect you, definitely use you as leverage against your people. Marcus started the truck, again felt it cough and catch. I don't love your species, but I'm not handing you over to become a lab experiment. Why not? Genuine curiosity. Your son died because of my people. You'd be justified in hating me, in wanting revenge. Marcus pulled out from under the overhang, pointed the truck north, and drove for 5 minutes before answering. David didn't hate you. He saved 47 of your people because he saw them as people. If I betray that if I let revenge turn me into someone who'd abandon a woman who needs help, then his death meant nothing. I become proof that he died for a species not worth saving. Silence from the passenger seat. When Marcus risked a glance, he found Lorraine staring at him with an expression he couldn't parse. What? Nothing. Just, she turned away, looking out at the desert. The veil chose better than I thought. They drove the 60 miles in tense silence, Marcus watching for pursuit that never materialized, Lyran occasionally touching his arm to share strength through the bond when exhaustion threatened his focus. By the time White Sands appeared on the horizon, a cluster of prefabricated buildings slowly being reclaimed by sand and wind, the sun had peaked and started its descent. The facility looked exactly as abandoned as Marcus hoped. No vehicles, no fresh tire tracks. The perimeter fence sagged where supports had rusted through, and the guard station stood empty, their windows dark and accusing. Marcus parked the truck inside one of the larger buildings, a hangar that had once housed experimental aircraft, now home to nothing but dust and the skeletal remains of projects that never launched. The space swallowed sound, turning the truck's engine into a dying echo. He killed the ignition. The silence afterward felt profound. Liren stared up at the hangar's vaulted ceiling. What is this place? Somewhere we can rest, regroup, figure out what happens next. Marcus climbed out, his body screaming protest at every movement. The adrenaline had burned off completely, leaving nothing but exhaustion and the sharp awareness of his age. There should be that emergency supplies in the admin building. Water, at least. Maybe rations if the scavengers haven't found them. And after we rest, Liren joined him, steadier now, but moving with the careful deliberation of someone rationing limited strength. What's your plan? I don't have one. Marcus headed for the hangar's exit, paused, looked back at her. You're the alien queen, you tell me. What happens when your people realize you're alive and bonded to a human? Lorraine's expression hardened. My brother Veyron comes for me, and when he arrives, we'll need to decide whether we die fighting or surrender, and die more slowly. The admin building yielded 3 cases of bottled water, 2 boxes of military MREs dated 2018, and a first aid kit that Marcus immediately ransacked for anything useful. Not much. Bandages, antiseptic pain medication that had expired 4 years ago, but would probably still work. Better than nothing. Liren sat against the wall in what had been the facility commander's office, watching him inventory their meager supplies with the patience of someone conserving energy. The runes on her skin had dimmed to barely visible traces, her body shutting down non-essential functions to prioritize survival. Marcus handed her a water bottle and an MRE. Eat, your body needs fuel to heal. She examined the military meal packet like it might contain poison. What is this? Chicken and noodles, allegedly. Probably tastes like wet cardboard, but it's calories. Marcus tore open his own packet, forced himself to eat despite his stomach's protests. The food settled like gravel, but his hands stopped shaking after the 3rd bite. Lorraine ate slowly, methodically, her face carefully neutral. After the 5th bite, she set the packet down. This is what your military feeds its soldiers. In the field, yeah, it keeps you alive. That's about all you can say for it. Marcus finished his meal, drank half a bottle of water, and felt marginally human again. How long before your people find us? Hours. Maybe a full day if we're fortunate. Lorraine pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around them. The gesture made her look younger, vulnerable in ways that didn't match the authority she'd carried earlier. Varen has access to the fleet's tracking systems. He knows which sector I was surveying when the marauders attacked. It's only a matter of time before he calculates search patterns and finds the crash site. And when he finds it, he'll find evidence of the bond. The Veil's energy signature changes when it accepts a sentinel. Unmistakable, undeniable. She met his eyes. He'll know what I've done, and he'll come to correct my mistake. Marcus leaned against the desk, felt the wood creak under his weight. Correct meaning kill. Correct meaning sever the bond and restore family honor. If that requires killing you, he won't hesitate. If it requires killing me, she paused, something flickering across her face too fast to identify. He's wanted my crown for 20 years. This gives him the justification he's always needed. Your own brother would kill you for political power. You've never had siblings who wanted what you have. Not a question. Liren stood, walked to the window, stared out at the desert that stretched endless in every direction. Veyron is brilliant, charismatic, loved by the military faction that thinks I'm too soft for leadership. He's been waiting for me to make a mistake this catastrophic. I've handed him exactly what he needed. Marcus watched her profile backlit by the setting sun and thought about David, about the brother his son never had, the family that ended with one flag-draped coffin and a grief that never quite scabbed over. So we run. Simple. Direct. The only option that didn't end with both of them dead. We stay ahead of your brother, stay off the grid, survive long enough to... He stopped, realizing he had no idea how that sentence ended. Liren turned from the window. Long enough to what? Live as fugitives forever. The bond ties us together, Marcus. I can't leave Earth without you. You can't survive long-term without understanding the Veil's demands. We're trapped by what we've become. Then we figure it out, together. The word tasted strange in his mouth, unfamiliar after 13 years of deliberate isolation. You said the bond shares resources. Strength, regeneration, whatever else. That makes us stronger than either of us alone. We use that advantage. Against trained Corvathi warriors. Against my brother who commands a fleet. Lerayan's laugh came bitter. You fought well against the marauders, but they were undisciplined scavengers. Veyron's soldiers are elite. They've trained their entire lives for combat. You've had your sentinel abilities for 4 hours. Then you'll teach me. Marcus pushed away from the desk, moved to stand beside her at the window. You said the bond deepens with contact. That will eventually be connected without touching. Use that. Show me what I need to know. Liren studied him, her violet eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. It will hurt. Knowledge transferred through the bond doesn't come gently. Your mind has to restructure itself to accommodate concepts that don't exist in human neurology. I've survived worse. Probably a lie, but Marcus had committed to this path the moment he'd pulled her from the armor. No point in hesitation now. She extended her hand, palm up, an offering and a warning. Once we begin, we can't stop until the transfer completes. You'll see everything. My memories, my training, my... She hesitated. Everything. And I'll see yours. No secrets, no privacy. The bond strips away all barriers. Marcus looked at her hand, at the runes that marked her as alien, at the crystalline gauntlet that marked him as something no longer fully human. He thought about David, about the choice his son had made, knowing it would cost him everything. He took her hand. The world dissolved. Marcus stood in a throne room that shouldn't exist, architecture that hurt to perceive directly, walls that curved in directions human geometry couldn't accommodate. A younger Liran, 20 years younger, maybe more, knelt before a woman whose presence felt like gravity pulling at something deeper than his body. The Queen, Liran's mother. Dying, Marcus understood without knowing how he knew her, life force bleeding out through wounds no medicine could heal. The dying Queen's hand touched Liran's forehead. The Veil chooses its bearer, not bloodline, not tradition, character. You are strong enough, daughter. You are worthy, man. Then the Veil, the real Veil, not the fragments Marcus had seen, flowed from mother to daughter like liquid starlight, and Lerayan's scream echoed across dimensions that human throats weren't designed to navigate. The scene shifted. A battlefield. Not Earth. Somewhere else, a world with 2 moons and vegetation that glowed bioluminescent even in daylight. Liren, older now, commanding troops with the certainty of someone who'd learned leadership through blood and failure. Watching her soldiers die. Making the calculations that turned people into acceptable losses. hating herself for it. Another shift, Meridian Station. Marcus recognized it from the reports from the nightmares that had haunted him for 13 years. But this perspective was wrong, not human viewing the battle from orbit, watching the station burn. And there a man in marine combat armor running back into the collapsing structure. Once, twice, three times. Each time emerging with civilians who shouldn't exist, who the official reports had never mentioned, because acknowledging them meant acknowledging complexity in a war that demanded simplicity. The fourth time the building came down and Lorraine, watching from her command ship, made a sound that transcended language. Grief and rage, and something else that Marcus finally recognized because he'd felt it himself for 13 years. Guilt. She'd given the order, not to destroy the station, but to attack the military installation next to it. The explosion that killed David Webb and 47 civilians had been her decision, her tactical calculation, her acceptable loss. And she'd lived with that knowledge every day since. The memories kept coming relentless, each one carved into Marcus's consciousness with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Lyraine's childhood, her training, her coronation, her slow realization that the war she'd inherited served no purpose beyond perpetuating itself. Her decision to seek peace, her brother's growing resentment, the political maneuvering that had positioned her survey mission to Earth as the first step toward reconciliation. Then Marcus's own memories reflected back at him through Lyraine's perception. David as a child, 6 years old, bringing home a wounded bird and demanding Marcus fix it. The Gulf War sand and blood, and the screaming weight of triage decisions that left Marcus's hands stained with other people's dying. His wife's face cancer hollowed the day she'd made him promise to keep living after she was gone. A promise he'd broken slowly, one isolated day at a time, until he'd become a ghost haunting his own life. The bond stripped away everything, left them both naked and bleeding and desperately painfully seen. When it released them, Marcus collapsed to his knees, gasping, his mind restructuring itself around concepts that didn't fit human neurology. He understood the veil now, not intellectually deeper than that, understood it the way he understood breathing automatic and essential. Lyrraine knelt beside him, tears tracking down her face. I killed your son. I gave the order. I knew there were civilians, and I calculated that destroying the weapons depot was worth the collateral damage. I murdered David Webb, and you saved my life anyway. Marcus looked at her, at the woman who'd carried that guilt for 13 years, and felt his rage collapse under the weight of her grief. You didn't pull the trigger. His voice came out rough, scraped raw by the transfer. You made a tactical decision in a war neither of us wanted. David made his own choice. He could have left after the first rescue, the second, but he went back because that's who he was, not because of your order, because of his character. That doesn't absolve me. No, it doesn't. Marcus stood, offered her his hand, pulled her up. But it means the guilt you've been carrying isn't yours alone. We share it now. That's what the bond means, right? Everything's shared, no barriers. Lyrraine stared at their joined hands. You should hate me. I did, for 13 years. Marcus didn't let go. But hate is exhausting, and I'm too old to waste what's left of my life on it. David wouldn't want that, and if we're going to survive what's coming, we need to be something other than enemies bound by accident. Before Lyrraine could respond, the gauntlet flared with sudden heat. Not painful warning. Marcus's new understanding of the veil translated the sensation instantly. Proximity alert. Something approaching. Something hostile. He moved to the window, staying in shadow, and scanned the darkening desert. 3 aircraft, Corvathi design, sleek and predatory, descending toward White Sands with the precision of military operations. No searching, no hesitation. They knew exactly where to find their targets. They're here, Marcus turned to Lyrraine. Your brother, she joined him at the window, her face draining of color, his personal guard, the Crimson Talons, elite hunters trained specifically to retrieve assets and eliminate threats. Which are we, assets or threats? Both. Lyrraine pulled away from the window, began checking her remaining armor fragments. They'll attempt capture first. Varen wants me alive for the trial, wants to publicly strip my title before executing me. But if capture proves too costly, they have authorization to kill. Marcus ran calculations, tactical assessments learned from 2 wars, and crystallized by the Veil's transferred knowledge. 3 ships, probably 6 warriors per ship, standard Corvathi deployment. 18 elite soldiers against two exhausted fugitives in an indefensible position. The math was simple. They'd die here if they stayed. The hangar has a back exit. Marcus grabbed their supplies, what little they had. If we move now, we can reach the truck before they establish a perimeter. And go where they'll track us. The truck's thermal signature, the veil's energy are life signs. Liren stopped, her expression shifting as new understanding dawned. Unless we hide what they're tracking. Halboya. She moved to him, placed both hands on his gauntleted arm. The bond can mask our signatures if we merge our energy patterns completely. Make them read as one source instead of two. They'll still detect us, but they'll be looking for a human and a Kravathi. They won't recognize a bonded pair. Because bonded pairs don't happen. Because queens don't bond with humans. Ever. It's not in their tactical database. Liren's hands tightened. But it requires absolute synchronization. Complete trust. If either of us hesitates, the pattern breaks and they'll see us clearly. Outside, the aircraft landed. Hatches opened. Warriors emerged, their armor gleaming even in the desert twilight, weapons ready, moving with the fluid coordination of soldiers who trained together for decades. Marcus watched them deploy, watched them establish a perimeter with professional efficiency, and made a decision he'd been avoiding since the moment Liren had called him Sentinel. Do it. Whatever it takes, merge us. Liren met his eyes, searching for doubt she wouldn't find. It's not temporary. Once we synchronize this deeply, the bond becomes permanent. No separation, no independence. We'll be connected for whatever time remains to us. Then we'll be connected. Marcus pulled her closer, felt the veil respond to their proximity. I've been alone for 13 years. Maybe it's time to try something different. She kissed him. Not romantic, not gentle. Desperate and necessary, the physical anchor for an energy transfer that transcended biology. The veil exploded between them, merging their signatures, their life forces, their very essence into something that read as neither human nor Korvathi, but something entirely new. Marcus felt himself dissolve and reform, his consciousness expanding to accommodate Liren's presence. Not possession, not control. Union. Two separate entities maintaining their identities while becoming part of something larger. The bond completed with a sensation like lightning striking upward from the earth. When they separated, Marcus understood what they'd become. Not human, not Korvathi. Sentinel and Queen merged at a level that made their earlier connections seem like a handshake compared to brain surgery. Outside, a warrior called out in a language Marcus now understood perfectly. Energy signature detected. Single source. Human origin. Investigating. Liren's lips curved with grim satisfaction. They can't see me. Only you. It's working. Then let's move before they realize their sensors are lying. Marcus grabbed her hand. Their connection no longer needed contact, but the physical touch still helped, and headed for the hangar's back exit. They moved through the facility like ghosts, Marcus's new awareness, letting him anticipate patrol patterns. He shouldn't be able to predict Lorian's knowledge of Korvathi tactics, keeping them always one step ahead of the search. The truck started on the first try, and Marcus drove without lights, navigating by starlight in the desert's skeletal geography. Behind them, white sands erupted with activity. Warriors searching, scanning, their confusion growing as their targets vanished, despite every technological advantage, saying that should be impossible. Marcus drove 5 miles before allowing himself to breathe. Liren sat pressed against him, their merged energy signature requiring proximity to maintain the illusion. They'll figure it out eventually. Veyron isn't stupid. When standard tracking fails, he'll start considering impossible scenarios. How long do we have? Hours, maybe a day. She turned to look back at the facility, now just lights in the distance. He'll send word to the fleet. They'll expand the search grid coordinate with satellites, start monitoring for any anomalous energy readings. Eventually, they'll realize the truth. That we're bonded. That I chose you over my crown. Over my people. Over everything I was supposed to be. No regret in her voice. Just exhausted acceptance. When that happens, Veyron will stop trying to capture me. He'll move straight to execution, because a queen who bonds with a human is already dead by every law that matters. Marcus drove in silence for 3 miles before responding. Then we make sure he never gets the chance. How we're 2 against a fleet, 2 against an empire. What possible we find allies. Marcus took a turn that led deeper into the desert toward the mountains that formed Arizona's spine. Your brother has enemies. You said there are factions that oppose him. People loyal to you. We find them. Build our own force. That takes time we don't have. Then we buy time. The gauntlet hummed with restrained power responding to his determination. We become ghosts, legends, the bonded pair that shouldn't exist. We hit Veyron's operations, disrupt his plans, make him divide his forces trying to find us. And while he's looking, we gather everyone who's tired of his ambition. Liren studied him with cautious hope. You're talking about rebellion, about civil war. I'm talking about survival, about making your brother pay a price so high for killing us that he decides we're more useful alive. Marcus glanced at her. You said the bond chose me, that the veil is never wrong. Maybe it chose me because I know how to fight wars nobody thinks you can win. Is that what you did in your wars? No, I kept people alive while other men fought wars. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel, but I learned something in those wars. Learned that the side that looks like it's losing can still make winning too expensive to be worth it. We don't have to defeat your brother. We just have to make him bleed. Laren was quiet for 5 miles. Then there's someone who might help, Elder Thessa, my mother's chief advisor. She's protected me from Veyron's worst schemes for 20 years. If anyone in the fleet remains loyal, it's her. Can you contact her without alerting your brother? The Veil has quantum communication capability. Untraceable, unbreakable. But I'll need time to establish the connection, and it will drain both of us significantly. She looked at their joined hands. Hours of vulnerability while we reach across space. If Veyron's forces find us during the transmission, then we make sure they don't. Marcus checked the rearview mirror. Empty desert, no pursuit. How much time do you need? 6 hours, maybe 8 if the interference is bad. They drove until they found it, a canyon system deep in the Sonoran Desert accessible only by a dirt road that looked abandoned decades ago. Natural cover, multiple escape routes, and terrain that would slow as any ground pursuit. Marcus parked the truck in the deepest part of the canyon, under an overhang that would mask their thermal signature from aerial surveillance. Perfect as hiding places went. For a while, Liren sat cross-legged on the sand, her hands extended, palm up, the runes on her skin brightening to full luminescence. Marcus knelt facing her, took her hands, and felt the veil open channels he'd barely learned existed. Her voice echoed inside his mind. Don't let go. No matter what happens, the connection breaks, we lose everything. Marcus tightened his grip. I'm not letting go. The world shifted again, but differently this time. Not memory, not knowledge transfer. Communication, his consciousness, riding Lorraeans across distances that made light seem slow. Stars blurred past galaxies, contracted to points, and then they were there somewhere else. Somewhere that existed more in concept than space. A presence coalesced before them. Ancient, powerful, radiating the kind of authority that came from surviving centuries when others burned out in decades. Elder Thessa. Marcus recognized her from Lorraean's memories, though those memories didn't capture the sheer weight of her existence. The Elder's voice carried harmonics that human ears weren't designed to process. My queen, you live. Reports said you'd perished in the crash. Veyron's reports. Lorraine's mental voice stayed steady despite the strain Marcus felt through their connection. He wants me dead, Elder. Wants my crown. I've given him the excuse he's always needed. The human. Not accusation, observation. You've bonded with the species we're supposed to fear. I've bonded with the father of the man who saved 47 of our people. Lorraine's grip tightened on Marcus's hands. With someone the Veil chose. Someone worthy of being sentinel regardless of his species. Thessa's presence shifted, and Marcus felt himself being examined, judged, measured against standards he couldn't articulate. The scrutiny lasted subjective hours, compressed into seconds, and then the Elder spoke again. The Veil chose well. I see David Webb's courage in this one, his stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Marcus found his voice, though speaking across quantum channels felt like shouting underwater. Can you help us? Give us time to build a defense. I can give you truth. Thessa's presence darkened. Prince Veyron has declared you both dead, has assumed regency with council approval. has signed alliance with the Xyranthian Empire, promising them Earth as tribute in exchange for military support. The words hit like artillery. Marcus felt Lorrain's horror mirror his own. Earth, Lorrain's voice cracked. He's selling an inhabited world that violates every law you established. Thessa's tone carried bitter satisfaction. He's systematically dismantling your policies, your treaties, your entire legacy. The council supports him because he promises strength where you offered compassion, conquest where you offered peace. How long, Marcus forced the question past the rage building in his chest. How long until Earth? 6 months. The Xyranthian fleet needs time to mobilize. But the treaty is signed. Earth's fate is sealed unless, Thessa paused. Unless you return, challenge him, prove you live, and the bond is legitimate. Lyran's laugh came hollow. Challenge him with what army? What authority? I'm bonded to a human. That makes me anathema. The council will execute me on sight. Not if you invoke the trial of the veil. Thessa's presence intensified. Ancient law, older than the council. If two claim the crown, the veil judges between them. Whoever the veil accepts rules. Whoever it rejects dies. Marcus felt Lerayan's fear spike. Veyron will never accept those terms. Veyron has no choice. You invoke the trial publicly with witnesses from both species and he must answer or abdicate. Either way, you force him to face judgment. Thessa's voice softened. I've protected you since you were a child, Lerayan. Let me protect you one last time. Gather allies. Build your strength. Return when you're ready, and I'll make sure the trial proceeds according to law. And if I lose just above a whisper, if the veil rejects me because I bonded with Marcus, then you die knowing you tried to save two worlds instead of surrendering to fear. The connection began to fracture, strain, overwhelming even quantum channels. Thessa's presence started to fade. 6 months, my queen. Use them well. I'll gather what loyal forces remain. But know this, your brother commands the fleet. You command only what you can build from nothing. Then she was gone, and Marcus and Lerayan crashed back into their bodies with force that left them both gasping. Marcus released Lerayan's hands, his whole body shaking from the exertion. The gauntlet had gone dark, its power reserves depleted. Lerayan collapsed sideways, her runes flickering like dying stars. They'd bought themselves 6 months to build an army from nothing. 6 months to prepare for a trial that would end with one of them dead. 6 months to save two worlds that didn't know they needed saving. Marcus looked at the woman curled beside him, at the bond that tied them together, at the impossible task they just accepted. And despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the mathematical certainty of their failure, he found himself smiling. David would have loved this, would have jumped at the chance to save people who needed saving. Consequences, be damned. Marcus Webb, 68 years old. Nobody's hero, contaminated with alien technology and bound to an exiled queen, was about to spend his last 6 months of life trying to make his dead son proud. He'd faced worse odds. Probably. 6 months. The words haunted Marcus as he carried Lyran to the truck as he drove deeper into the canyon where the rock walls would shield them through the night. 6 months to transform from fugitives into something that could stand against an empire. The math still didn't work. But math had never stopped David. Marcus found a cave mouth hidden behind a juniper copse natural shelter that satellites wouldn't see. He carried Lyran inside, later on sand that was cool and dry, and sat with his back against stone that had witnessed 1,000 years of human struggle. She woke at dawn, the runes on her skin pulsing back to life as the bond redistributed energy between them. Her eyes found his in the dim light filtering through the cave entrance. 6 months. Not a question. She'd heard everything through their connection, remembered what he remembered even while unconscious. That's not enough time. Then we'll make it enough. Marcus helped her sit up, handed her water and the last protein bar. Tell me about the Crimson Talons. Their training, their tactics, their weaknesses. They don't have weaknesses. That's the point. But she drank the water, ate the bar, and began talking. Veyron's elite. 12 warriors, each bonded to a weapon entity similar to the Veil, but smaller focused. They hunt in pairs, coordinate through quantum links. Never sleep more than 2 hours at a time. Everyone has weaknesses. Marcus pulled out the paper map, started marking locations. They're hunting us in terrain they don't know using technology that assumes their targets are human and Kravathi separately. We use that. Hide in plain sight. Become something their sensors can't categorize. And then what? Even if we evade them for 6 months, we still have to return. Face Veyron. Survive a trial that... She stopped, looked at him. You already have a plan. Not a plan, a direction. Well, Marcus marked 3 locations on the map: Nellis Air Force Base, Groom Lake Area 51. These facilities have been studying Kravathi technology since first contact. Equipment, weapons, maybe even captured Veil fragments. If we're going to face your brother, we need to understand what we've become. That means access to research your people don't want humans to have. You're talking about raiding military installations with 2 people against trained security forces. We're not 2 people. We're the first bonded pair in Kravathi history. Marcus met her gaze. The Veil chose us for a reason, you said. Maybe that reason is to show both species what's possible when we stop treating each other as enemies. Liren studied the map, then him, then back to the map, Area 51. That facility has restricted Kravathi access. Something there our governments agreed to keep secret from both populations. You know what it is? Rumors only, Project Genesis. Human volunteers modified with Kravathi DNA, attempting to create hybrid soldiers who could operate both technologies. Her finger traced the location. The program was shut down 30 years ago after too many subjects died, but the research remains. The samples remain. Marcus felt something click into place, puzzle pieces connecting across decades. Genesis protocol. That's what the Veil said when it recognized my blood. You think you were part of it? I don't know, but I was stationed at a classified facility in Nevada in 1985. Medical testing that I was told was routine vaccination. Marcus rolled up his sleeve, showed her a scar on his inner arm that had never quite faded. This isn't from any vaccine I've ever seen. Liren's fingers traced the scar, and through the bond, Marcus felt her shock. This is a genetic marker injection site. We use them for bloodline tracking, for ensuring royal succession remains pure. Her eyes snapped to his. They gave you Kravathi DNA. 30 years ago, they made you a bridge between species and you never knew. Neither did David. The realization hit like a physical blow. He inherited modified genes. That's why he could withstand radiation that should have killed him. Why he had the strength to carry 47 people through a collapsing building. He was a hybrid and he died never knowing what he was. Or maybe he knew exactly what he was. Liren's hand covered his. Maybe that's why he chose to save them. Because on some level, genetic memory or instinct or fate, he recognized them as kin. Marcus pulled away, stood, needed movement to process what he'd learned. He walked to the cave entrance, stared out at the desert painted gold by morning sun. Somewhere out there, warriors hunted them. Somewhere above, fleets maneuvered. And somewhere deep in a classified facility, answers waited. We go to Area 51. Decision made. No hesitation. We find the Genesis files. We learn what this bond really means. And then we use that knowledge to build something your brother can't destroy. When tonight, after dark, Marcus turned back to her. But first you're going to teach me everything you know about Veil combat. If we're walking into a trap, and we probably are, I need to be more than a lucky amateur with a gauntlet. They spent the day in that cave, and Lorraine proved to be a merciless instructor. She made Marcus practice channeling energy until his arms screamed, made him maintain the merge signature, until sweat poured down his face, made him coordinate attacks through the bond, until they moved as one organism with 2 bodies. Again. Her voice showed no mercy even as exhaustion darkened the skin under her eyes. The crimson talons won't give you time to think. You have to react, trust the bond, let the Veil guide you. Marcus raised his arm, felt the gauntlet respond, sent a lance of energy into the cave wall. Rock exploded. Dust rained down. His knees buckled. Liren caught him, shared her strength through the contact. Better. But you're still thinking like a human, like an individual. You're part of something larger now. Stop fighting alone. I've been alone for 13 years. It's a hard habit to break. Then break it fast, because when we face Veyron, any hesitation kills us both. She pulled him upright, moved around him like a predator evaluating prey. The veil responds to will, to absolute certainty. You saved me because you were absolutely certain you wouldn't let me die. Find that certainty again. About us, about this bond, about what we're trying to accomplish. Marcus closed his eyes, reached for that feeling. The moment he'd stood between Lirain and 30 armed raiders. The moment he'd decided some debts transcended reason. The gauntlet flared to life. Good. Lorraine's approval came through the bond more than her voice. Now hold that. Maintain it. Let it become your foundation. They trained until sunset, until Marcus could maintain the merge signature, without conscious effort, until the gauntlet responded to intention, before thought crystallized into action. Not perfect, nowhere near the skill of someone who'd trained their entire life, but functional, dangerous, enough. As darkness fell, they prepared. Marcus inventoried their supplies: 3 bottles of water, 1 MRE, his medical kit, the truck with maybe 50 miles of gas left. Not enough for what they were planning. But then nothing about this was enough. Lirain shed her remaining armor fragments, kept only the undersuit and the small crystalline blade she'd salvaged from the wreckage. Light, fast, optimized for infiltration rather than direct combat. Area 51 is 70 miles northwest. Marcus traced the route on his map. Security will be heavy. Satellites, drones, ground patrols. The moment we're spotted, we'll have minutes before full response mobilizes. Then we don't get spotted. Liren studied the map with tactical precision. The bond can mask our signatures from Korvathi sensors. Can it fool human technology? Only one way to find out. Marcus folded the map, headed for the truck. If this works, we ghost past their perimeter. If it doesn't, we fight our way out and find another approach. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan we have. They drove through the desert under a moonless sky, headlights off, navigating by starlight. In Marcus's memory of terrain he had crossed dozens of times during his service years. The landscape looked different in darkness, familiar and alien at once, like returning to a home that had moved on without him. 40 miles out, Marcus killed the engine, let the truck coast to a stop behind a ridge that would hide it from aerial observation. They'd walk the rest of the way. Slower, safer, and if everything went wrong, the truck would still be here for whoever survived to use. Liren touched his arm, ready. No, but we're doing this anyway. Marcus checked the gauntlet, felt it pulse with restrained power. Stay close. Maintain the merge signature. If we separate, we're both visible. They walked. The desert at night belonged to predators and things that knew how to hide. Marcus and Lirain moved like shadows, their merged energy reading as a single anomalous signature that sensors would struggle to categorize. Human Kravathi. Something else. The ambiguity bought them time, bought them distance, bought them a chance. Area 51 appeared on the horizon as a cluster of lights arranged with geometric precision. Runway lights, building lights, searchlights that swept the perimeter with mechanical regularity. Marcus had seen it before from a distance during classified briefings that had warned him the facility didn't officially exist. Now he was about to break into it. They approached from the north, where the terrain provided the most cover, and the fence line ran closest to a maintenance building that Marcus remembered from architectural briefings. Old intelligence, possibly outdated, but better than nothing. The fence was new, 15 feet high, razor wire on top, sensors embedded every 20 yards. Marcus studied it with professional appreciation. Good security, not perfect. Nothing was ever perfect. He placed his gauntleted hand against the fence, felt the electrical current running through the metal, and channeled energy in precise opposition. The current neutralized. Sensors went dark in a 5-foot radius, temporary, maybe 30 seconds before the system flagged the anomaly. Now! Marcus grabbed Liren, pressed against the fence, and the gauntlet cut through metal like it was paper. They slipped through, moved into shadow, and Marcus felt the veil reweave their merged signature to mask the intrusion. 30 seconds. Seconds. The sensors came back online, registered nothing unusual, and the alert never triggered. They were inside. Marcus led them toward the maintenance building, avoiding the searchlights through timing learned from watching their patterns. Lorraine moved behind him, her breathing synchronized to his, the bond keeping them coordinated without words. The maintenance door was locked. Marcus channeled energy through the mechanism, felt tumblers melt and reform, heard the lock click open. They slipped inside, found themselves in a corridor that smelled like machine oil and the particular sterility of classified facilities. Genesis research would be in the secure labs. Lorraine's voice barely reached him. Basement level, probably. Maximum isolation from external observation. How do you know the layout? I don't, but I know how we design secret facilities. Principles are universal. She moved to a wall panel, studied the facility map behind the scratched plastic. There, Sub-Level 3, Bioresearch Division. Marcus memorized the route: 3 corridors and 2 stairwells. Simple, direct, and probably monitored by security that would mobilize the moment they appeared on cameras, unless the cameras couldn't see them. He pulled Lyra closer, felt the bond deepen, and pushed energy through the connection in a way Lorraine's training had shown him. The merged signature expanded, became a field that bent light and electromagnetic radiation around them. Invisibility. Not perfect, not sustainable for long, but enough. They moved through the facility like ghosts past security stations, where guards stared at monitors that showed nothing unusual, past checkpoints, where automated systems registered no intrusion. The bond drained them both, energy bleeding away with every second of maintained camouflage, but they pushed forward. Sub-Level 3. The door required a keycard they didn't have, but the gauntlet had stopped caring about locks. Marcus cut through the mechanism, and they slipped into a laboratory that looked exactly like every classified research facility Marcus had ever seen. Clean, sterile, organized with the precision of people who understood that mistakes could end civilization. And there, in a locked filing cabinet that Marcus opened with a thought, were the Genesis files. 12 folders, 12 names, 12 men who'd volunteered for a program they'd been told would make them better soldiers, but had actually been an attempt to create human Cravathi hybrids decades before anyone admitted the species could coexist. Marcus found his file, service photo from 1985, 30 years younger, still believing the military used people for something other than experiments. Medical records, genetic profiles, progress notes written in clinical language that stripped away humanity and left only data. Subject 7 shows exceptional integration. Cravathi genetic markers stable at 27%, cognitive function enhanced. Physical resilience increased. Recommend continued observation. 27% Cravathi. Marcus stared at the number, tried to process what it meant. He wasn't fully human, hadn't been for 30 years. David had inherited those genes, had been born something other than what the hospital records claimed, and he died saving people who were genetically partly his own species. Liren read over his shoulder. 27% is significant. Most subjects died when integration exceeded 15%. You survived because... She trailed off, scanning the notes. Because your psychological profile showed exceptional adaptability, ability to accept contradictions, to hold opposing truths simultaneously. That's just a fancy way of saying I was too stubborn to die. No, it means you were capable of being both human and Cravathi without your mind fracturing from the contradiction. She pulled out another file, scanned it. The other 11 subject. 10 died within 5 years. The 11th? She stopped, her face going pale. Marcus took the file from her shaking hands. Subject 12. Name redacted. Status terminated after displaying violent rejection of genetic integration. Subject eliminated to prevent security breach. The photo showed a man Marcus recognized from boot camp. Jackson, good soldier, better friend, dead in a training accident, the official report had said. Except the dates didn't match, and the cause of death listed in this file was terminated for psychiatric instability related to hybrid rejection. They'd killed him, murdered him when the experiment failed, and covered it up with lies and paperwork. Marcus felt rage building, cold and focused. How many others, how many people did they experiment on? These are the only files. Lorraine kept searching, methodical despite her distress. But there's a reference here. Project Genesis Phase 2. Planned for 2010 but never implemented because Phase 1 was deemed too unstable. What was Phase 2 supposed to be? She found the proposal, read it in silence for long enough that Marcus wanted to scream. Finally, second-generation hybrids. Children of Phase 1 subjects born with integrated genetics rather than having them forced in adulthood. More stable, more viable. She looked up at him. David wasn't an accident, Marcus. He was Phase 2. They were monitoring him from birth. The world tilted. Marcus grabbed the desk for support, felt the gauntlet flare with his rage. They knew. When he enlisted, when he deployed, when he died at Meridian, they knew what he was, and they let him go anyway. Marcus's voice came out flat, emptied of everything but fury. They used him as a test subject, sent him into radiation that would kill a normal human just to see if the hybrid genetics would protect him. And when he chose to save Korvathi civilians, they probably considered that a successful proof of concept. Lorraine's hand found his shoulder. Marcus, I'm so sorry. This is worse than I thought. Sorry doesn't help. Marcus grabbed the files, all 12, and shoved them into a bag he found under the desk. But evidence does. These files prove both our governments have been lying for decades. That they created hybrids in secret, monitored them, used them, and covered up the failures. What are you going to do with them? Expose everything. Marcus headed for the door, stopped, turned back. Your brother promised Earth to the Xyranthians. But what if Earth's population learns that humans and Korvathi have been genetically compatible all along? That the war we've been fighting is partially a civil war between related species? It changes the calculus. Understanding dawned on Lorraine's face. Veyron's treaty depends on viewing humans as inferior, as livestock to be traded. But if humans are genetically Korvathi, then genocide becomes fratricide, and your people might reconsider whether they want to be party to exterminating their own distant cousins. Marcus moved back to the filing cabinet, started pulling more files. We need everything, all the research, every scrap of evidence that humans and Korvathi are more similar than different. They worked fast, filling the bag with decades of classified research. Genetic profiles, integration studies, success rates and failure analyses. The complete picture of a project that had tried to build bridges between species in secret, while politicians maintained the fiction of irreconcilable differences. Marcus was reaching for the last file when the alarm went off. Not subtle, not quiet, a klaxon that screamed through the facility accompanied by flashing red lights and the mechanical voice of an AI. Intrusion detected. Sub-level 3. Bioresearch Division. All security personnel respond. Lethal force authorized. Time to go. Marcus grabbed Lorraine's hand, felt the bond snap into combat configuration. Can you maintain the camouflage field? Not while we're moving fast. They'll see us. She pulled her crystalline blade. We fight our way out. No, we're faster than them. We use the bond to coordinate, and we're gone before they can establish a perimeter. Marcus headed for the stairwell, then stopped. Unless you have a better idea. Actually, yes. Lorraine moved to a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard in patterns that shouldn't work on human technology, but somehow did. If they want an intrusion, let's give them a real one. The screen lit up with facility schematics. Lorraine entered commands that Marcus didn't understand, but recognized as hostile. Firewalls collapsed. Security protocols inverted. Locked doors throughout the facility began opening and closing randomly. What are you doing, if creating chaos? Making them think this is a coordinated attack rather than the two fugitives. She hit one final key, and somewhere in the facility, an explosion echoed. That's the fuel depot. Non-lethal mostly, but it will keep them busy. They ran, up the stairwell, taking steps 3 at a time, the bond lending them speed and coordination that made them move like water flowing uphill. Behind them, boots thundered. Voices shouted, weapons primed with electronic whines that promised pain. Marcus hit the ground floor, running burst through the maintenance door into desert night and nearly collided with a security patrol that had responded faster than expected. 6 men, rifles raised, flashlights trained on his face. The sergeant's voice came hard. On the ground now. Marcus raised his gauntleted arm, felt Lorraine's presence merge with his intention, and released a shockwave that knocked all 6 men off their feet without killing them. The bond had taught him precision, had shown him how to disable without destroying. They kept running. The perimeter fence was ahead 50 yards, and Marcus could feel the security mobilizing behind them. More guards, more weapons, helicopters spinning up in the distance. 40 yards. Searchlights swept toward them, close enough that Marcus could feel the heat. 30 yards. A rifle cracked. Asphalt exploded 2 feet to Marcus's left. Warning shot. The next would be aimed center mass. 20 yards. Marcus channeled everything he had into the gauntlet, felt it resonate with Lyraean's power, and sent a lance of energy at the fence. Metal vaporized, wire melted. A hole appeared large enough to drive a truck through. They dove through as automatic weapons fire chewed up the ground behind them. Into darkness, into desert, into the anonymous expanse that had sheltered fugitives since humans first learned to run. Marcus ran until his lungs screamed, until his legs went numb, until the facility lights disappeared behind rock formations and distance. Then he collapsed, gasping, the gauntlet's glow fading to barely visible. Lyran fell beside him, her runes dimmed to nothing, her breathing ragged. They'd made it. Barely. Impossibly. But they'd made it. And they had the files. Marcus pulled the bag close, protected it with his body like it contained the last hope of two species. Because maybe it did. We have evidence. His voice came out raw. Proof that both governments have been lying. That we're more alike than different. Evidence Veyron will bury the moment he learns it exists. Lyran struggled to sitting. We need to disseminate it, broadcast it so widely that suppression becomes impossible. I know someone who can help. Marcus thought of Major Chen, of the dismissal that still stung, of the woman who'd thought him too old to matter. Someone who has access to military communication networks and a conscience that might override her protocols. You trust her? I trust that she loves her country more than she loves the chain of command. Marcus stood, offered Lyraean his hand. And when she sees what her government has been hiding, she'll have to choose between loyalty and truth. They walked back to the truck in silence, moved by exhaustion and determination in equal measure. The sun was rising when they reached it, painting the desert in shades of gold and blood. Marcus started the engine, pointed the truck south toward Nellis, and committed to a plan that would either expose decades of lies or get them both killed. Probably both. But David hadn't died so Marcus could play it safe. Hadn't sacrificed himself so humanity could remain ignorant of its own potential. The bond hummed between Marcus and Lyraean, power and partnership, and something deeper that defied simple naming. They'd come together by accident, forced into union by circumstance and desperation. Now they'd become something neither species had imagined possible, and they'd use that to tear down every careful lie that kept humans and Korvathi at war. 6 months. The clock was ticking. Time to make them count.